Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well,
The
thank you
25th
for
anniversary of HBES.
thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure to have you here. We're going to start off with a softball question.
Uh-huh.
In what discipline did you earn your doctorate, sir?
Anthropology.
That sounds about right. And when did you begin thinking about human behavior, and who or what prompted you to do so about from an evolutionary perspective?
Yeah, well, from the beginning, when I started graduate school in anthropology, which was way back in, when was it? Long time ago. 61, 1961. I always thought that there should be a biological dimension to human behavior. And I was taught that there wasn't, that somehow we were studying culture, not people. Culture was removed from people and independent of people, and I never fully bought it, but I never had a good perspective to challenge it. Then when I was at Johns Hopkins in 1972, I started reading, and I cooked up a theoretical perspective, which is like a lot. It wasn't orthodox evolutionary biology. It was mixed with ideas about culture as an independent thing. And I latched onto the Wynne-Edwards hypothesis, which is thoroughly discredited. Some people would say importantly wrong. And I thought social institutions might regulate population density. There's a book by a historian, E.A. Wrigley, Population and History, that is essentially the same perspective. So I put together a research project for the Turkmen in Iran, who I'd studied earlier. It was easier to go back to the same place, knew the language, knew the culture, and so on, and was going to test the idea that certain things like a high bride price, delayed co-residence with spouse after marriage would regulate population. As people got poorer, they'd reproduce later. Tested it, and the test said it wasn't true. So it did a lot. But I actually feel it wasn't all a waste, because I did frame it in scientific terms. Here's what's going to falsify it, and it got falsified. Then I started thinking, maybe I should just think in terms of evolution straight, like we're just other animals, and see what we. And that's when I came up with the first thing I came up with is what's it called, the cultural and biological success hypothesis, that people strive for status in every society, but the criteria for status are different in different societies, and they're set by the culture. I think people have higher status if they can do things that are useful to you. So in the Yanomamo, fierceness, guys that can be tough and push other people around, have high status, and those are the kind of people you want as your friends, and so on. But in the U.S., it'd be mostly money, education. In academia, I suppose, prestige and your citations and so on and you can rank people. And then people that have higher ranking tend to reproduce more. So that when you're striving for status, you're actually striving for reproductive success. Not consciously, probably, but that's what the outcome is on average. And it's true for women as well as men, although men, if the society allows polygyny, which my Turkmen did, the men gain much more through status than. But the women also, they marry wealthier men, they have better conditions, better food, better medical care and everything than poorer people, and their children survive more. So the women gain, and it's mainly the status of their husband, because it's a very male chauvinist society, very male dominated society. But anyway, that was the first idea I had. And then I got very involved in organizing various things. Knapp and I did a special session at the American Anthropological Association in 1979, and we invited a lot of people. Irv DeVore was also doing a session at the same time, so we had 2 days of sessions. That was when the anthropologists sort of their initial awareness that people were challenging some basic ideas, that maybe culture really wasn't independent of biology, and they were very much upset. In the business meeting, they had a motion to condemn sociobiology, and that was the word we used then. It was sociobiology, not evolutionary psychology, not behavioral ecology, it was sociobiology. And Napoleon he never hides. If he has an idea that's going to irritate people, he doesn't hide it. So the title of our session was Sociobiology and Social Structure, that word right out there. And so it was a huge fuss. We got put us in a big auditorium, a lot of people, a lot of angry questions, a lot of protests. But out of it came this volume. It was one of the first edited volumes that sort of presented a sociobiological perspective in anthropology. Evolution, what was it called? The title of the book I edited. Evolutionary Biology and Human Social Behavior. Mm-hmm. And then the editor wanted us to put colon and Anthropological Perspective. He thought it was going to sell as a textbook. Almost 800 pages. Not going to sell it. And it went out of print, unfortunately. Well, we went with the wrong press, so it wasn't clear what press we should go with. Anyway, then he wanted me to stay at Penn State and have us build a sociobiological program there, and that, we were working on it, but the authorities, the people that had power in that department, which would be Paul Baker and Bill Sanders, as best I can try to make sense of what happened back then, they were at the top of the hierarchy. They didn't want anybody attracting too much attention below them. We were doing that. They had to stop it.
Wow.
Well, and Bill Sanders wrote a memo around saying, you guys got to quit teaching this sociobiology stuff. Oh, yeah. And we had a big discussion, and issues of academic freedom came up and so on. But the issue came to a head when I went up for promotion, and I was denied, and the denial, both Knapp and I were upset about it, but Knapp said, well, you're not being treated fairly. If you want to go someplace else, I'll help you. And that started a process over a year where I wound up going to Northwestern. And when I went up for promotion, the chairman of the department did some things that were kind of slippery. They were supposed to have a committee of the senior faculty that write a report, recommendation. Don't promote this guy, here's why. Then the head of the department, they had heads, not chairs, would write one. And then many layers. Penn State's very hierarchic and very in love with their hierarchy. So he was going to help the faculty by doing both together and just writing one report.
Oh, how pleasant of him.
Yeah, it was nice, doing a big favor. And then when it got denied, it said I was denied promotion because I hadn't been at Penn State long enough. And I remember a conversation with the dean where he said, we have this sort of unwritten rule. If you haven't been here long enough, you can't get promoted. You have to wait a little longer. They had an ombudsman. Why a hierarchic institution like that had an ombudsman, I don't know. But I went to him, and he made some inquiries, and he came back and said, the reason that your promotion was denied was insufficient merit in 2.5 years to justify early promotion. Well, I'd been at Johns Hopkins for 5 years before that, so we were asking for promotion on the basis of it wasn't early. It was 7.5 years. And somehow he'd written this report in such a way that the work I'd done earlier didn't count. And I was starting over with a new perspective and so on. Anyway, adjustments were made and arguments were made, and the next time there was a separate report written by Napoleon Chagnon, which was rather positive. And then indirect report has it that the chair said, I agree with Chagnon's report, and then had all these negative things to say. But the next level, I talked to a guy in the bank about it. The next level, somebody said, it was pretty obvious there's something personal between you. and then it went on up, and that annoyed Knapp too. I got an offer from Southern Illinois, where is it? Carbondale. And my wife and I thought about it for a while and decided, no, we don't want to go to Carbondale. And if we turn this down, hoping Northwestern will come with an offer, we may not get the offer and we may be stuck here. And I thought, I won't be stuck forever. So I said no to Carbondale after I thought about it for a while. And then Northwestern came through with an offer. And Napoleon was hoping I'd stay anyway because I would get promoted and tenured. but they wouldn't let me know. They had an official date when they would announce, and I had to say yes to Northwestern. And so, my feeling was, these people have treated me like crap. I want to get out of here. And so we went to Northwestern.
There you go.
And then Knapp came to Northwestern later, but then he got this very tempting offer from Santa Barbara where they put him up on a high pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
But we talked about this. We talked about his interview. And he said that led to HBES in a way, because he and I were in Evanston, Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Dick Alexander and some other people were at Michigan. And it was an easy drive, not real easy. It's like 5 hours, but we could drive it in a day. And Dick Alexander suggested we have informal meetings.
Mm-hmm.
A bunch of people come from Ann Arbor. We'd put them up in our homes. Wouldn't cost them anything.
Mm-hmm.
We'd have informal discussions using the university's rooms, and we'd alternate. And we did that for a while. It was just purely informal.
And time-wise, we're talking...
And Bill Hamilton
1980s?
was at Michigan then, too,
Yep,
so
sure.
we had some big minds there. Bobby Lowe was involved at
Sure.
the Michigan end. Randy Nesse was involved. At first he was kind of skeptical about this evolution stuff, but eventually he got on board, and then he was the big organizer eventually. Then they had a center at Michigan, Evolution and Human Behavior, had money, and they started doing most of the meetings, and they started printing programs and inviting keynote speakers. Robert Hind was came one time, and there were some other outstanding. I think, Franz de Waal, who was wonderful on his primates. Anyway, at a certain point, there were a group of people which I really don't know much about, but the word got out that they thought it should be just a psychological group, and they were going to form a Evolutionary Psychology Society and exclude the anthropologists. I went to their first meeting that was described this way in 1888. Philip Rushton was there causing trouble, talking about race. John Tooby did a good rebuttal of Rushton in the sort of discussion. It was a small meeting, but printed program and so on. And Randy Nesse then came forward with the idea that we should have a formal organization open to everybody everywhere, not just a Michigan Northwestern thing. Well, and by then Martin Daly and Margot Wilson had gotten heavily involved. So McMaster, which was also easy to drive to Ann Arbor, was involved, but it would go beyond that. And so he had a big session in a big auditorium, and we talked and came up with a name. Some people suggested we should call it Human Evolutionary Science. I remember that. And my suggestion was you don't want to put science in the title, because if that's in there, it's not science. It's Christian Science, library science, political science.
Exactly.
Don't put science in there.
Exactly.
That's a clear sign you're trying to put something over. And they bought it, and we said we'd make it. They had the Center of Evolution and Human Behavior at Michigan. They said, we'll use that name, but we got to ask their permission. Well, they said no, and then they went out of business. But anyway, we just reversed the words then. It became the Human Behavior and Evolution Society. And we had the first meeting at Northwestern. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with Randy Nesse. He's trying to set up the society. I'm trying to set up the first meeting. We had to have a board, a governing board. We had to have a president. We got Bill Hamilton to agree to be our first president,
Pretty
which
good
was a
first president.
nice coup, nice
Yeah.
start. Yeah, and he's wonderful. And then Randy Nesse would be the second president. He would be president-elect. And Martin Daly got in there fairly early, too. But anyway, we had this first meeting. It was much less organized. We had sessions and a printed program, and people submitted abstracts, and we had a brochure that listed everything. But we stayed in dormitories at Northwestern. We had a special panel at the end, which included Richard Dawkins, George Williams, Ed Wilson, and Eibel Eibesfeld.
Wow.
We thought, that Eibel was going to be important. And, well, It was an interesting session.
Yeah.
And a lot of ideas kicked around and so on. And then we didn't have plenaries. We just had this panel at the end. We didn't have a keynote speaker. It wasn't that. We had a banquet. I don't think we had a barbecue. And I suggested at the banquet that we have a Evolutionary Poet Society. Some people ate that up. Dawkins, he loves poetry, and he wrote some stuff, and Knapp wrote some. And then some of the women came around and complained to me that some of the poetry was kind of male chauvinist. And that killed the Evolutionary Poet Society. And I don't think it was. They needed to broaden their perspective. But anyway, we had a lot of fun. And the second meeting then was McGuire and I think Rob Boyd at UCLA. And we had it out there. And then the next one was at McMaster with Martin Daly and Margot Wilson organizing it. And I didn't go because Napoleon wanted me to join him and do research down in Venezuela and do the Yekwana. He'd done the Yanomama group next. That's more acculturated. The Yekwana would be ones that I could study. So I went down there during the time of the meeting, and I came to the conclusion you never get any work done down there. The political situation was really difficult. He was famous and he had connections with people he could get in, but coming in there with not, a lot of connections. So I gave up on that and went and worked in Honduras with my former student, Lee Cronk. And, Lee had an interesting idea, which he's still pushing. There's a thing called an audience effect, which I suppose when you interview me and I know certain audiences, I'm going to say things that I want that audience to hear. If it was some other context, I'll shift. So he was interested in audience effects and what Rashomon effects. That's when I tell you what happened and then somebody else comes in and says, no, that's not what happened. You get, and he wanted to study these as phenomena themselves, and he wanted to do it in this island that in the Caribbean just off the coast of Honduras. And so we went down and did the project, and he found the effect was very small. One of the things we'd do is we'd interview a husband by himself and a wife by herself, and then we'd get a complex sample structure in order to do this, but then we'd get a husband and wife together. And the idea is that they'll, what husbands have to do for wives, what do wives do for, when the husband's there, the wife's going to say something different than when he's not there. And there was the effect, predicted effects were there, but they were small. And my comment to Lee was that there are 1,000 people that are indigenous to this island, and there's usually 1,000 tourists too, but okay. Said a community of 1,000 people is not a good place to talk out of both sides of your mouth. And so they don't do it in big time with the way they might someplace else. But anyway, he was a little disappointed. In his work in Kenya, where he was interested in the Trivers-Willard hypothesis, studied this group called the Mukugodo who speak Maasai, and they want people to think they're Maasai, and they're not having overwhelming success, but they're trying. Anyway, they are at the bottom of a hierarchy, and so the women marry up and have better mating pools, and the men don't. And he thought they should have daughter favoritism, and they do. He did focal follows and behavioral scans, and he had clinic records and survivorship rates and these growth for age charts, how they're doing. And of course they're all way behind the Western standards, but you could tell the girls were doing better than the boys. They really were favoring their daughters. But if you ask them, oh no, sons are more important. So as he puts it, the behavior goes one way and the culture goes another. And it was really quite marked. And my explanation, which I think he accepts, is among the Maasai, sons are more important. These people want you to think they're Maasai, so we think sons are more important. But when it comes down to actually doing things, they're more worried about their daughters. And the daughters have higher reproductive success because they marry up and marry younger, and the men have trouble getting married at all. He was looking for something similar in Honduras, and it wasn't nearly as visible.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. In trying to bring an evolutionary perspective on human behavior and anthropology in the 60s of the 1970s. I imagine, aside from NAP, was it a relatively intellectually lonely time, yes?
Yeah.
And were there
Well,
other
we
key
tended
supporters?
to close in, so Knapp and I were close. We'd have a few students, like Monique Borgerhoff-Mulder was one of my first students that was evolutionary in her orientation, and then Lee Cronk, and we, Nancy Berthet, who's now an immigration lawyer, and Paul Turk, who's now a pediatrician. Not the jobs weren't always available when they got out,
Wow.
and so some of them went other directions. Mark Flynn. So we formed a kind of closed group, and
Gotcha.
yeah, we were, and there was very much we were the sociobiologists,
That's
and
it.
these other people thought we were probably racist and sexist.
Wow.
At Northwestern, we had a conference to set up courses for distribution requirements, and we were all supposed to come forward with creative new ideas. So I said, I'll teach, and I didn't use the word sociobiology, which was a big red flag. I said I'd teach Introduction to Anthropology with a strong evolutionary component and talk about things like kin selection.
Mhm.
And Andrew Beatty, a botanist, Australian, said, you shouldn't do that. And I said, why? He said, it'll encourage undesirable social movements.
Wow.
And I said, like what? He said, like National Socialism. Well, that's the kind of stuff we got. You must be trying to somehow advocate National Socialism.
Wow.
I did do the course, and I disguised the evolutionary stuff as much as possible. And I've taught it for probably 4,000 people over the period of 30-some years. None of them turned into Nazis.
Well played.
That I'm aware of.
You taught it well. What other obstacles did you face besides the shenanigans at Penn State in your chair in trying to study evolution and human behavior?
They were just all over the place. As soon as you'd mention at a social gathering that you're a sociobiologist, people, so I started, well, I'm a Nazi. Yeah, no,
Wow.
I think we should gas Jews. No, they didn't. Well, we didn't think we were saying anything that outrageous, but they did. And so we kind of were careful with our words. And a lot of people, well, I remember it was Mark Flynn wanted to go work in Trinidad, I guess. He got a review of his research project, and it had two reviewers. He was a student. They have two reviewers. One, he wanted to investigate whether there was a matrolateral bias, a uterine bias, he called it, in their kinship. He thought there might be because of labor migration and uncertainty of paternity and so on. And one of the reviewers said, there's no point in doing this. We already know they have this uterine bias. And the other one said, there's no point in doing this. We already know they have a strong patrolateral bias. So they're completely opposite, and we already know the truth. Don't waste your money extending this guy. So I call up the National Science Foundation, the person that handles the pre-docs, and I said, what do you do? They both said, don't fund, you just add those up. She said, oh no, we read each of them and integrate and try to get a view of what's going on. Well, I would think if they did that, you got two experts saying completely different things. Maybe we do need some. But those kinds of things just happened all the time. Things turned down for research support. Articles submitted for publication turned down. Oh yeah, we were sort of faria or whatever you want. We were bad people. And I got all of the introductory textbooks in anthropology would have a section. Almost all. The Ember and Ember was an exception, but most of them did. That would say there's this thing called sociobiology, and it's completely indefensible intellectually. Wow. In terms of facts, it's just totally off the wall. In terms of theory, it's ridiculous. But it's also racist and sexist. And there's always been a tendency for people to want to use biology to justify right-wing positions, and that's what's behind this. So the students would read it in their textbook, and then they'd want to know that the students, undergraduates at Northwestern, were mostly open-minded. And when I told them, it's not really what's going on, a lot of them were open to it. I didn't get much flack from the undergraduates. The graduate students, once they start wanting to kowtow to their professors, then they think, oh yeah, this is really bad. And the secretary of the department at Northwestern one time, she said, I hate your sociobiology.
Wow.
Yeah. And I said, what is my sociobiology? And she said, it's the theory that blacks are intellectually inferior. Yeah. Can you find that in the program?
Mhm.
And I don't think it's there. But anyway, this idea that it was somehow evil,
Mhm.
and it made things uncomfortable, and it made people pull away from you. You sort of form a little group, and then it disappeared. There's like a Malcolm Gladwell flipping point,
Mhm. Mhm.
and at best I can occur at well, I first encountered about 2005. This started in 76 with the 75 with the publication of E.O. Wilson's
Mhm.
Sociobiology. I had a group of undergraduates that had liked my courses and wanted to do a special reading course on evolutionary psychology, behavioral ecology, three of them, and we're reading along, and at one point I said, it just came up, I said a lot of people thought this stuff was racist and sexist. And there was this co-ed was sitting around and she did this. Why? She had never heard the idea. It had disappeared from the textbooks,
Wow.
and other professors weren't teaching it anymore. And it was gone, and she couldn't see any reason why anybody would think that, which I said, well, your thinking's good, but it's not what's been conventional up to now. And I don't know. Then Joshua Tiber did that article and showed that the evolutionary psychology graduate students were the same place as all the other psychologists, way to the left. And Henry Lyle and Eric Smith replicated that exact. They did everything the same with anthropologists and got the same result. We're graduate students in a social science, our way to the left. That's where they are.
Yep.
And the ones that are evolutionary, no different than the rest.
Yep.
And this myth that we were encouraging right-wing things, so you could find proof. You could find somebody like Philip Rushton,
Yeah.
who really was, but he was one person.
Yeah.
You don't. That's not a good sample.
No.
So for some reason it vanished, and I'm glad it's gone.
Sure.
But I wonder, where'd it go?
Mhm.
What happened?
Let me
But-
ask you this about your own personal research. Which of your many contributions do you think has had the greatest impact on the
Probably
field?
the one I published in the Chagnon Irons volume
Mhm.
called Evolutionary Cultural and Biological Success.
Yeah.
Well, I'm remiss, confess, to being an old fart who's not doing his work as well as he should. I wanted to do a meta-analysis of all the studies of this, and it's just kind of languished. I haven't followed, and I'm working with Ray Hames on it, and I'm going to try to catch him at these meetings. And
Mhm.
what we need to do, he's waiting for me to do the mathematical analysis. He's got all the data together. I think we need to get an expert on the mathematics
That's sure, I understand.
and have him do it
Sure.
as a third author. And I'm happy. I don't care where I am in the author. I just want to get it out to show that before general practice of contraception in our society now, people practice contraception like 99% of the time, and when they want to have children, it's usually a decision.
Mhm.
Most of human history, it wasn't that way, and it's been in the last 100 to 200 years that it's changed, and even in the developed world in the 70s it's been changing. So it's a big transition where reproduction is a conscious decision and sex is separated. Earlier it was not, and the people I studied in Iran were not. The average woman had 7.5 children, because the average woman, no woman has to have a child, but they were having like 6, 7, 8, 9, and they get married at 15, live with their husband at about 18, and start, they just have sex and the children come. And they have big families.
Yeah.
And with higher status, they have more. Higher status, typical man of substance has wealth and reputation and other things. When his wife, he'll get married at around 15, start to have children around 18. When his wife is in her 40s and getting near the end of her reproductive years, he'll marry another much younger woman, usually from a socially depressed group, and have another family. And so these guys can do pretty well. Anyway, that was most of human history was that way, and but then this transition occurred. Another article I did write which irritated some people, was the one on adaptively relevant environments, the AR, yeah. And a lot of people, like Napoleon, when he gave his plenary, said, well, some people call it the EEA, but my friend Irons here calls it the ARE, and my friend Dick Alexander calls it the histories. The ARE is not the EEA, it's a different thing. It's specific to a particular adaptation, a particular mental module, and that relates to part of the environment, and you ask whether the environment is novel, whether it creates a mismatch or not, depends on which of these elements. So you've got a lot of different relevant environments for a lot of different adaptations. And so in terms of status striving, I think it was not a mismatch until contraception became, and now it is. And there is one famous example to make it clear to undergraduates, one of the best ways for a human male to reproduce is to go to the sperm bank.
Yeah.
But they're not interested.
Yeah, I use this example.
Young, attractive females, they can't keep their eyes off them. Drive by the sperm bank. Who gives a shit? But, you know, and the ideal job is night janitor at the sperm bank if you want to reproduce. but we're definitely overwhelming mismatch, and that nobody is competing for that job. But anyway, yeah, that's a transition that happened. Well, yeah, if I can look at my own family, my grandparents had huge families, but they didn't. They were the friend. These are people born in the middle of the 1800s. They limited their family size, and so on down. Other parts of the world, it came at different times. My Turkmen that I studied hadn't happened yet when I was there. I think it may have now. It's hard to say, but the Iranian government realized they had a problem with too many young people, and and with their version of Islam, birth control is not a problem. So they started encouraging birth control and limiting births. And I think probably my Turkmen are backwoods folks, be the last to get in on it, but I wouldn't be surprised they're doing it. And so yeah, the world, that's part. And I'm a firm believer in the naturalistic fallacy. This is good. This mismatch is a good thing. Something as an adaptation doesn't mean it's morally good, and that's a whole separate issue. And I wrote, Dick Alexander wrote this book, The Biology of Morality.
Sure.
And it's hard to read. Sorry, Dick, if he sees this, but you know, I've talked to him about that, and he said people should come up to the level of the book. Well, they don't always. So I wrote a long article and published it in Zygon, Journal of Religion and Science, which is a group that I've gotten involved with in Chicago. Anyway, I tried to make it very clear, and not many people paid much attention to that article, and I think it's because it starts out saying I'm summarizing somebody else's theory, and they think, oh, there's not much original. I also critiqued it, and I thought the critique was pretty important, but many people, it doesn't get cited as much as I thought it should. But I also point out then that while he took Rawls as his idea about morality, and it isn't really exactly pure Rawls, but society discusses and decides what the moral standards are, and that helps to hold it together as a cohesive society. And it had to do with intergroup competition. And then, of course, David Sloan Wilson running in there with his group selection. And E.O. Wilson is making noises about group selection. You know, it's good, I guess, to keep exploring new ideas. He says kin selection is not relevant, and I think he's just gone off the rails on that one. I don't know how he could possibly think that, but I think when you have cohesive groups competing with each other, which you do have in human society, there is a group selection component to what's going on. Just a component. It does not erase kin selection. But anyway, in there is the idea then that biology doesn't dictate our moral standards. And most people, it's not really a controversial idea. It's just a lot of people forget about it. And Randy Nesse and Craig Palmer and some others that got interested in rape got a lot of flack.
Oh yeah.
And they were saying that human males have various rape adaptations when they can't reproduce otherwise they're raped. And people went berserk over that. But the problem, if they're right that there are adaptations for that, I think it's actually quite simple. Men want sex. That's not surprising in evolutionary terms. They know they can get what they want by being coercive physically. Put the two together and you get raped sometimes. That doesn't make it morally correct.
Correct.
That it's an adaptation. Lots of adaptations are terrible things.
Sure.
And so you have to but people couldn't get that straight. And a lot of, like, I remember an animal behaviorist I met at the animal behavior meetings when they were in Oaxaca. I went because they were in Oaxaca. But also I used to go to animal behavior meetings. Some woman there, a good animal behaviorist, and she thought that Palmer and Thornhill and Palmer book was just awful. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "It's full of crap." It's not a very precise discussion of what's wrong. And I didn't want to, push the discussion, so I didn't. But I try to emphasize that in my teaching now, that moral issues or social welfare issues are separate from this. And if I find some people are doing something you don't like and it's deeply embedded in human nature, doesn't mean it's good.
Moreover, if you're looking to mitigate rape, if you're looking to mitigate sexual coercion, it probably behooves you to deeply understand it.
Yeah, and they do say that in the book.
No, they're great about it.
Yeah, and well, I think that now there is an awareness, and they try to counsel. But young women do need to be aware that young men can get out of hand.
I'm with you.
And and now it's come out too. It started with the Balkan War, when in war, and men have power. They rape all over the place, and it used to be covered up, so you don't hear as much about it like in World War II. But it went on all over the place. And then, for some reason, in Berlin, this woman wrote this book. So there's Eine Frau in Berlin, I think is the name of it, and she was raped, and all her friends were raped, and she wrote a book about it. And the Russians, when they came in and they defeated the Germans and they broke out the vodka, and here were these German women. The men were all off fighting somewhere or dead. Rape.
It happens. Very common in war.
Yeah, and but it's not good. And it's not, sociobiologists didn't do it. E.O. Wilson's not responsible for it. Or Randy Thornhill. But these people talk like they are.
They commit the naturalistic fallacy. They're arguing that we're excusing or looking at something as morally right just because we're saying something might be natural or evolved, and it's a fallacy. And there's never been an evolutionary psychologist or sociobiologist I've ever met who thinks that way. It's a straw man. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there was a whole, during the roughly 30 years that this was all big, there was this sociobiology debate and controversy. There was in secondary sources a picture of what sociobiology was about. It was just totally false.
Absolutely.
And I think, I recently read Robert Tripper's book, which is wonderful, but it's like a heavy Indian meal with a lot of curry in it. You got to be ready to handle a lot of stuff.
Terrific analogy.
But it's wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. He clarifies what's going on in a lot of this stuff, and human communication. I guess what we're doing now. I'm telling you what my experience is, and so on. A huge amount of it is deception. Of course, we're all, I'm sure here, this will all be exceptions, but but there's a lot of, why communicate the truth to somebody?
Right.
You give them a story that'll accomplish what you want.
Yeah, that's right. There's an angle.
And so there's just a huge bullshit quotient
in
everything that goes on.
You still want me to do the grad student question, or should I get through it? Sure.
Well, okay. No, for grad students, it's simple. Find something you're interested in doing.
Follow your passion. And
I wrote a paper on religion. Religion is a hard to fake signal of commitment.
Oh, sure.
And so it's on my website, www.williammyers.net. Plug. It hasn't been picked up as much by the evolutionary psychologists, and I'd like to see people do more of that.
Bill, let me tell you a little bit about the background of why we're doing this.
Okay.
So last year, Catherine Salmon, my collaborator on this project, and I caught up at HBES in Albuquerque.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a rooftop bar just reflecting on the people who are no longer with us.
Mm-hmm.
People like her advisor, Margot Wilson, people like Bill Hamilton, George Williams, Linda Mealy, Deb
Mm-hmm.
Singh, David Rowe, and how the modern students, the upcoming students, are never going to have a chance to meet them, to get to know them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping, I know you've met many of them, if not all of them, and I'm wondering if you could share some anecdotes, some reflections on them that students can't get from their written word.
Oh boy. Should I let scandals on?
Please.
Well, there's one thing I was told, and I don't know whether to believe it. And it's not as bad as it sounds. But, oh, well, you don't have his name on here either.
Who's this?
Oh, boy, I can't remember names quickly anymore. Guy in England, down at...
Maynard Smith?
Yeah, John Maynard Smith. There's a guy at the London School of Economics, where I was a research student for a year, and where they had some conferences, named Christopher Badcock.
Mm-hmm.
He's a Freudian psychologist. Sometimes I wonder what his name.
With that last name, who would have guessed? But continue, yes.
But anyway, you got
Picture
of
Sure,
yeah.
sure.
No, he's a wonderful person. He was quite a bit older when he gave the keynote address at HBES when we had it in London. He was in his 80s then, and it was on signaling theory, which
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in. He invited my wife and I to come down and join him at his place on the South Shore of England. We went around and looked at sites and had a pub dinner and so on. He's really a very nice guy. But Christopher Badcock
Mm-hmm.
tells this story that there was a group of Soviet spies that were outed, the Blunt group, and JBS Haldane definitely was part of that group. He claims Maynard Smith was too, who was a student, but that they didn't let out who all of them were because they were watching him and doing him various things. So the story never got out, but he was a Soviet spy after World War II. And a lot of these idealists at that time thought by balancing Soviet and Western power, we'll keep the world a better place. So they had good intentions. And then, I don't know, when we had our pub dinner, John Maynard Smith confessed, he said, I'm a lapsed revolutionary. And we had a discussion of the idea that all men are created equal. That's a moral idea. Doesn't mean they're all equally good at playing basketball or whatever else, doing mathematics. But yeah, I guess he had been quite a serious Marxist. He was a member of the British Communist Party, which is legal, unlike in this country where people's constitutional rights got compromised on that issue. But yeah, anyway, so that's one story.
Sure.
And I told my wife that, and her reaction was, "That nice old man?"